Hello and welcome to the 17th Annual Town History Series. I'm Jill Peckett-Roy, Archivist and Special Collections Librarian for the Sagadahoc History and Genealogy Room at Patent Free Library. The Town History Series is hosted jointly by Patent Free Library and Bath Historical Society. I'd like to thank our financial sponsor for this event, White Mountain Wealth Management of Raymond James. This 17th Annual Town History Series is dedicated to the memory of Russell Malone and Dr. Charles Burden, who both passed away late in 2020. This is the fifth and final talk in this year's series. I want to take a moment to thank everyone involved for their hard work and patience while we adapted to more than one big change. Thank you to all of our speakers and those who worked behind the scenes to help them prepare their presentations and research. Thanks to Jack Martin of Bath Historical Society for being ready to help with technical difficulties, and to the guys at Bath Community Television for making sure that people could watch the series even if they don't have computer or internet access. Thank you to our local historical societies for selecting our speakers and getting the word out about this year's series. Thank you very much to Peter Goodwin for his support and encouragement this year and for the past 16 years, which he spent making this series what it is today. And finally, thank you to our wonderful audience. Zoom attendance alone has equaled and maybe even exceeded in-person attendance in prior years. And nobody had to share a chair or hunt for parking at the library. So thank you for showing up and asking great questions and letting us know what this series means to you. Today, we're going to conduct a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. We'll use Zoom's Q&A feature. Feel free to type your questions in at any time. And if you need to communicate with me or Jack Martin about audiovisual issues, please use the chat function. If we don't answer your questions today, or if you would like to discuss the presentation further, we will hold an informal follow-up session with the speaker on Tuesday, February 16th at 4 p.m. If you would like a link for that session, please register on our website. Our speaker today represents Woolwich Historical Society. WHS wants you to know that they have used the COVID closure to renovate their museum, and they expect to open this summer. Until then, you can find them on Facebook. I'm pleased to welcome Rob Stevens back to the Town History Series after last year's popular presentation about the Arnold Expedition. Rob has been a boat builder since attending the apprentice shop in Bath in 1980 and has worked on several historic maritime projects, such as the Viking boat Snorri, the Providence replica, the reenactment of the Arnold Expedition, and the nearly complete Virginia project. Rob, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, good morning. I'm glad you people could join us today. I gave the talk last year about Woolwich soldiers going with Benedict Arnold up to Kennebec. And so I thought, well, this will be an easy tie-in because then Woolwich soldiers went to attack Castine with their same officer, Samuel McCobb. The problem I found out is that very, very few of them went with him again. I don't know what that says about him as an officer. Maybe we'll figure that out. Just give you a little background about the start of the revolution. It didn't start out of thin air at Concord and Lexington. There had been years of agitation. The rebels in the District of Maine had been collecting arms and ammunition for a couple of years. They also had what's called a train band or a training band. And this goes back decades. The English, had set this thing up when they, even before coming to the New World. And it was basically everybody every man between the ages of 16 and 60 would meet a couple times a year and be trained in military tactics or drink beer. I'm not quite sure what they did. I wasn't invited. Every man was supposed to have equipment also for being a soldier. The Minutemen was a different group. The Minutemen were, gosh, I knew I wasn't going to come up with the name. There was also a group of Minutemen who were expected to be able to go at a minute's notice, which these towns also had. When the news of Concord and Lexington and Concord arrived in this area 8 days after the battle, right away they gathered up a detachment to send to Cambridge of 70 men. And these 70 men were led by Captain McCobb. It took them 6 days to march to Watertown, where they, were basically assigned to the trenches around Boston, which the colonial army had set up, at the end of the day of Concord, Lexington and Concord. The area, some of the town names have changed. Some of them have gotten smaller in size. Around this time period, there were like 5 towns or settlement areas. The 5 were Georgetown, which basically covered Phippsburg, Arousek, Georgetown, Bath. It did not include Woolwich. Woolwich had just recently separated from Georgetown. So Georgetown's 1, Woolwich is 1, Newcastle is 1, Poundleborough is the 4th, and Poundleborough would have been what's now Dresden and Wiscasset and Alna, and the 5th one was Topsham. And this is where they would have drawn their troops from. They got to Boston and got too involved in this little dust-up called Bunker Hill. The story is that the McCobb's men were at the rail fence, which seems like might not have been the best place to be because the trenches were probably a little safer than the rail fence. But it's interesting, you can find diaries from soldiers, and one of the soldiers describes the Battle of Bunker Hill as the regulars landed a number of troops and we engaged them. They drove us off the hill and burnt Charlestown, 300 houses. Dr. Warren was lost in the battle. The siege lasted about 3 hours. They killed about 50 of our men, wounded about 80, and we killed of the King's troops 896. Of that was 92 officers and 104 sergeants. I'm always sort of fascinated how in some of these diaries, it's not, there's not a lot written. It's just, well, they landed and drove us off the hill. After that, I have one more picture of this is actually a painting done around the time period of the battle. You will see Charlestown burning here, and then this is Bunker Hill. One of the things that we never think about, if you're familiar at all with Boston, is this was the countryside. This wasn't fighting in what Boston looks like nowadays. These were out in the fields where this was taking place. Just to give you a map, this is Boston. It's all labeled, but this is Boston. Most of this has been filled in since then. You see Charleston was a short row over from Boston. And you'll also there's not much of a way of fleeing Charleston by land. I think it's even smaller than this really makes it look. You have Charleston, the town that burnt. You have Breed's Hill, where the majority of the fighting took place. The rail fence, why am I looking? There we go, I'm sorry. The rail fence was in here as sort of a last minute to keep the from the troops, the British troops, from being able to surround them. The real Bunker Hill is over here, and Winter Hill, where the Woolwich troops were stationed, is here. And it was boring. It was boring. They just sat there and surrounded Boston. They couldn't get in Boston. The British troops really couldn't leave Boston. And basically what happened over the next so many weeks and months is the soldiers on both sides would pick off anybody foolish enough to expose themselves. I believe the riflemen from Virginia and Pennsylvania were very good at doing that. And there was a lot of deserting, and it's sort of surprising they would desert to the other army. Maybe they just wanted to see things from the other side. This group here of soldiers from Woolwich decided this was just too boring, and they'd rather drag heavy wooden boats up the Kennebec River. So they went with Benedict Arnold, went with Captain Samuel McCobb, and marched to Newburyport, sailed to the Kennebec and up to Fort Western, where they marched. They were in the last group of four. They marched up the Kennebec. They also, as they marched up the Kennebec, were seeing all the bateaus that had been destroyed, all the supplies that had been damaged and lost, all the men who were being sent back for being sick. And so they weren't really seeing the best of it. Well, about halfway up the trip to Quebec, the last company, or well, brigade, were ordered to go back. And that definitely is another story. I've forgotten how to switch slides. This is just a picture of them pulling the bateaus up the, well, actually it's the Dead River, but works for either one. And they march back. I'm afraid a lot of the pictures I have here are maps. I hope they come across your computer all right. But they left, and the majority of them marched back to Winter Hill. So they did not quit. They did not leave the war. They just went back to where they felt they were needed. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go back. Some of these soldiers here have a pretty interesting story. I believe Jacobus Bailey died on the expedition. He disappears from military records, and he disappears from town records, family records. And so, I mean, of course, he could have deserted, he could have fled, but I have not been able to trace a Jacobus or a Jacob Bailey to anywhere else in the country that would fit this person. John Buck died on the expedition. His grave is up in Moscow, but it's mismarked with a different non-existent soldier's name. The Hilton family here, I may have stolen them for the town of Woolwich. They may have lived on the other side of Montswig Brook. In Woolwich, they had a sawmill, and the family was attacked by Indians in 1747, and the father, also named Ebenezer Hilton, the oldest brother, Joseph Joshua Hilton, and the brother-in-law were killed when they were attacked by the Indians. And William Hilton, who you don't see here, but will be in the group of Hiltons who went to the Penobscot Expedition, was kidnapped. And somehow he managed to escape after about 6 months. He was taken to Quebec. They actually sold him to somebody who was going back to Europe, and somehow he managed to escape. Two other interesting people here. Ebenezer Smith was a Woolwich man, marched to the siege of Boston, signed up to go attack Quebec, became ill, and hired a substitute, Ebenezer Savage. Ebenezer Savage started his career as a substitute on the Arnold Expedition, and obviously was very talented because was a captain by the end of the war. And in the War of 1812, he was offered the rank of lieutenant colonel. After a couple of weeks, he decided he just was too old to do that. But interesting to go from being a substitute to a lieutenant colonel. And then Abner Wade, whose grave this is in Nequasset. A number of these people are in Nequasset. He rose through the ranks and, fought through most of the war. This is John Montresor. He likes to pop up every now and there in the life of Woolwich men. In 1760, in the winter, he walked from Quebec to Topsham on snowshoes. In 1761, in the summer, he plotted a water route, a canoe route, from Quebec to Fort Halifax. He plotted a different canoe route going back from Fort Halifax. Then he shows up in Boston, unfortunately on the wrong side of the trenches, but the rebels managed to steal his map and his journal describing the trip to Quebec, which Arnold and his men used when they went to Quebec. And then he ended up owning an island off of Manhattan, named Montresor's Island. A number of the soldiers that went to Quebec, when they came back, they joined the Continental Army, Colonel Michael Jackson. I couldn't find a good picture of Michael Jackson, though there are a million on the internet. But they went and attacked Montresor Island at the time of fighting the British in the New York City area. Montresor fought the war from the very beginning. He fought from Lexington and Concord, and he was in the army until the peace was signed. He did have a bit of bad luck. He was wounded during Lexington and Concord. He was more severely wounded during the Battle of Bunker Hill, and he was even more severely wounded at the attack on Montresor Island. But he continued to serve the revolution for the next, until 83. And like I say, this is where a lot of Woolwich men ended up in his regiment. Not just the Benedict Arnold, but the people who signed on afterwards. This is what happens when you let your kids or your wife get their hands on your computer and they throw in pictures of the musical Hamilton. Um, the, the British finally decided that it wasn't worth it to stay in Boston. Um, they had to get all their supplies and all their troops from Europe, from England. It was not like they would just go out in the countryside and buy what they needed. And so when Boston was evacuated, March 17th, 1776, what that left the British was Halifax, Nova Scotia, New York City, Newport, Rhode Island. And so you have this big section between Newport, New York, and Halifax, where the British control no land. And they, sorry, flipping my notes here. They decided that they needed a someplace in between. The mouth of the Penobscot, or to be accurate, the Penobscot Bay was an ideal location. The American privateers were harassing the English fleet and Nova Scotia. Both sides would raid each other's towns and burn their buildings and steal their crops and what have you. That meant that the English had to have warships assigned to convoy duty between Halifax and New York, which, took up some of their warships. They wanted a place to hide in bad weather. What I mean is, a hurricane hole. They wanted a place they could go anchor when the weather got really bad. And they wanted to prevent the rebels from getting mast timber and firewood and other timber from the Penobscot River area. The last thing was they had dreams of creating another province called New Ireland. And this is where the loyalists, the Tories, had been fleeing from Boston and other areas in the Revolution. And they actually was a town, even before the war, not of any great size, but there was a town, and the loyalists were gathered in this area. When the British sent about 700 men to Castine, to Bagaduce, as they called it, the Americans heard about it within days. And Massachusetts decided something really needed to be done. And so they decided to raise a navy to attack it and raise troops. They asked the Continental Navy for some ships. And one of the three Continental Navy ships they supplied was the Providence. The Providence had been in the Navy since the very beginning of the Navy, and it was John Paul Jones's first command. Pay no attention to what Jim Nelson says in the comments. Here is an actual painting of the Providence attacking a English merchant ship. That's not a warship, so it's not as big a deal to take on. This is a modern painting, again, of the Providence, but this is what some of the privateers and the transports would look like. The Navy, or the Massachusetts government, got 3 Navy ships from the Continental Navy. The Massachusetts Navy had 3 naval ships that were available, and New Hampshire had a rather new, rather nice naval ship also. So they got 7 naval ships. They also got about 12, what is often referred to as private vessels. Instead of referring to them as privateers, they refer to them as private vessels. And a lot of these were ships. And to know, back in that time, the vessel on the left here is a ship. It has 3 masts and all the sails are square. The vessel on the right is a sloop because it has one mast and a fore and aft sail. They had to sort of cajole the privateers to join. They actually seized a couple of them. And they paid them. They paid them 90 pounds a day, which I guess was special for this invasion. And they also paid £6 15 shillings a month. They also offered the sailors the same pay and rations that the Navy got. I'm not sure that was a good deal. A lot of people seem to think that the private vessels, the privateers, had better food and better pay. The 3 counties in the District of Maine, in other words, Massachusetts' 3 counties, were supposed to raise the land troops. Lincoln County, which basically covered from the Kennebec area all the way to what's now New Brunswick, Cumberland, and York. Lincoln County was supposed to supply 600. Cumberland was supposed to supply 600, and York was supposed to supply 300. They did not have a lot of luck at this. They managed probably to supply about 850 soldiers. McCobb brought 120 men from the Georgetown, Woolwich, Pownborough area. And they actually sailed to Townsend, which is the previous name for Boothbay. Captain Donnell put these 120 men on his ship and sailed them down to Townsend. Okay. The militia basically showed up in their own clothes. Most of them brought their own weapons. When you see a list of what weapons, bayonets, canteens, blankets that the militia had, they usually only bring half or less than half of the amount needed for the number of soldiers that are being supplied. This is a list of the men from Woolwich who went on the Penobscot Expedition. You'll see a couple of names, Josiah Bailey, Morrill Hilton, Eliab Shaw. I feel like I'm missing somebody. These had been on the Arnold Expedition, and they now went on the Penobscot Expedition. And it's very difficult to find a good photograph from the Revolutionary War era. I was lucky to find a picture of the militia hanging out in Boothbay in Townsend, waiting for the transports to show up and take them to Castine. This is the areas the troops came from. From Boston to Newburyport, the Massachusetts government had closed the harbors. No one was to leave for 40 days. And then they extended that to no one was to leave until the fleet sailed from this area to Castine. The fleet went and stopped at Boothbay Harbor in the top right to pick up a number of the militiamen. You'll see Woolwich in relation to Boothbay, and they sailed up to Bagaduce, Castine. You'll notice I've also labeled Portsmouth. Keep that one in mind. This is actually Cox's Head at the mouth of the Kennebec. In the distance, you will see Fort Popham, which obviously was not there at the time. But a lot of troops from Woolwich, to finish their time, would serve their time at, they always reported it as Cox's Head. I think the real fort was Honeywell Point. Cox's Head, I think, was a lookout, and Morse Mountain also was used as a lookout. But you will find references to Woolwich soldiers building a fort at Cox's Head. Oh, and besides the Woolwich connection to Cox's Head, they did protect one of the transports from the Penobscot Expedition that was being chased by a privateer. It, ran in the Kennebec and over here into Atkins Bay, and the troops, Cox's Head and Honeywell Point, fired at the British privateer and kept it from catching the transport. This is one of William Gilkerson's beautiful paintings. He does just a fantastic job. Here we are heading off to Castine. There were 43 ships. I won't say loaded with men. This was actually something that benefited the rebels, is they sent so many ships. The British officer in charge of Castine, General Mclean, thought there had to be more than 3,000 men, whereas instead between the militia and the Marines, there were probably around 1,200. But a lot of decisions you make is dependent on how many men you think you're going to be facing. This is a picture of upper Penobscot Bay. This right here is Bagaduce, now Castine. This is the Bagaduce River, which isn't much of, you can't really go up there for any safety. But the British did control this island at the this island at the beginning, and they put 3 warships anchored or moored with each other along here to keep the Americans from being able to come in here. This picture represents that as the battle went on, the British moved further and further up the river. This represents, this represents the Americans at the end. I'm going to get back to this, and I will get back to this picture. Here's our buddy, Henry Moet. Henry Moet is our good friend who decided to burn Falmouth, which is nowadays the city of Portland. But he decided to burn Falmouth, and probably in part because of what the rebels had done at Machias, and probably because the rebels from Brunswick irritated him, and they think that might be why he got even with them. But anyways, he is in charge of the British ships at Bagaduce. This is Sir John Collier. We'll see him later. Just remember him for now. Paul Revere. This is actually 15 years, he's 15 years younger at this point. The only other picture I had made him look like, well, he was an old man, and my wife made me use this one. He does not come off well in the expedition, and in fact, he was court-martialed, though he's not a Woolwich man, so I don't know, but I don't believe he was found guilty. But anyways, okay, this is William Mclean. He was the captain of the Centurion, who took the militia from Cumberland County to Bagaduce. His ship, the Centurion, was lost at Bagaduce. And this is the mean guy. This is the guy that we like to blame, unless you're from Connecticut or related to Saltonstall, and then you blame General Lovell. And the Captain Saltonstall was in charge of the Navy, the American Navy. General Lovell was in charge of the militia. I'm afraid I could not find a picture of him. When they showed up at Castine, they had not gotten very far on building the fort. This is an aerial view of the fort as it's reconstructed. They continued to build the fort, till 1783, and they then came and rebuilt it again for the British for the War of 1812. So it probably looked nothing like this. Some of the dirt ramparts were no more than 2 to 3 feet high when the Americans showed up. There were no guns mounted, and the British thought they were in trouble. Well, as you can see, the Americans sort of took their time. The day after they showed up was too windy to land. Captain Saltonstall's one fight, was he took 4 ships, including the Warren, 32 guns, his ship, and they went alongside Henry Mowat's 3 ships and battled for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. The Warren probably got the worst of it. It took a couple of days to repair it. And one of the problems for the Warren was they had to approach the line of British ships head on. So that means they have 2 guns that they can aim at the British, while the British have 60 that they can aim at the Americans. And a day or two after that, they landed. This was the Americans' one big battle. Is they had sent groups in to reconnoiter and to harass the British and find out what the British had, and they did take a battery a day or two before this. When they landed at the side of Bagaduce of Castine, that the British just thought there's no way they're going to land there because it is insanely steep. I hope on your computer you can make this out. This is Castine. This right here is where they landed. This is the fort over here, but this right here is 1,200 feet. And where they landed, they had to climb 200 feet in 900 feet. So it was very steep, very hard, and it made a good spot for the British to just fire down upon them. The British actually, most of them fled back to the fort, and really only about 20 British soldiers under Lieutenant Moore stayed and fought and managed to inflict quite a number of casualties. The British assumed that when the Americans got to the top, they were done for. General Mclean later reported that he planned on firing 1 or 2 shots and then surrendering. I've been told I have to hurry up, and then surrendering, because he just thought he wasn't going to have his men killed for no reason. But the Americans just stayed and bought and built trenches. And that's basically how they spent the next couple of weeks, was building trenches. Interesting thing about this painting is the original was destroyed when the Pentagon was flown into on 9/11. They basically just sort of goofed off. Well, I won't say goofed off. The general of the militia and the captain of the Navy just argued and argued and argued and never really accomplished something, knowing that the British would be coming eventually. Well, the British did come. And this is a painting of the British sailing up Penobscot Bay to attack the American fleet. And back to this map, you have, here's the British fleet with some very large ships, much larger than, except for the Warren, the 32-gun Warren, larger than anything the Americans had. And so not only are they larger, but it means that the size of their guns are bigger. The American militia evacuates Castine so quickly overnight that the British don't even know they've left. But the Captain Saltonstall sets up a line of battle to do battle with the British ships, while the transports take the militia and they are supposed to flee up the river. What happens is the transports are heading up the river. About an hour after they've set up this line here, somebody seems to have panicked and fled, and that just everybody fled. And so now you don't have this armed wall. They're fleeing. They are faster than the transports, and they actually force some of the transports to run ashore while this is happening. So the transports run ashore, and they burn their boats. 2 of the ships tried to escape. The Hunter ended up running ashore, setting the ship on fire, but the British were too close behind and they managed to save the Hunter. The defense, they burnt, but the rest of all the fleet went up the Penobscot. And this is a picture of running away. It's probably not that good a picture because I don't think they ever had very much wind. That was part of the problem. General Solomon Lovell wanted to set up some sort of fort up the Penobscot. Well, they've now just lost all their militia, or much of their militia, down at the mouth of the river. And they just ran their boats ashore and burnt them. And there was very little organization as to what the troops should do. This is one of Paul Revere's least shining moments, where he sat there and used a boat to get his possessions to shore, while 2 other ships that were closer to the British had no way of getting to shore. Samuel McCobb threatened to fire on them. But they ended up burning their ships. What with the guns being loaded and the powder on board, it was quite dangerous when these things blew up. This is a map a British officer made. It is interesting because you can locate where some of the ships were wrecked. The only problem is the map is backwards. It has the Penobscot on the wrong side of the Bagadoos. Another picture of the boats fleeing. You see here, boats are burning in the background. Some of the boats are still trying to get up. And there were also some officers who were going up and down the river trying to organize resistance. Just pretend this is the Providence on fire. This is also the modern replica. And they destroyed all the boats. And I thought, this is pretty, even though there's snow, there's a pretty good picture of the Providence being destroyed. The Providence and about 10 others were destroyed up by the mouth of the Kenduskeag Stream. And the troops all fled through the woods with almost no organization. General Wadsworth managed to take 4 or 5 groups and lead them back. He was really about the only one who did that. Some of these men, a number of these men came from the Boston area and really didn't know anything but that the Kennebec was to the west. And some of them were home within 2 days. Some of them may have taken 6 or 7. The supposedly quite a number starved on the way, but I think that's an incredible exaggeration since it was summer and it was only a couple of days. My wife keeps giving me the chop chop sign. General Wadsworth has an incredible story about being captured and escaping, which you will have to go to your local library and look up. Basically, we're done. Just the soldiers again from Woolwich and the 2 expeditions. This is actually the defense. They have actually, in the last 20, 30 years, done some underwater archaeology. And this is the defense, one of the 2 vessels that tried to flee around to the west. And this one, the crew ended up burning near Stockton Springs. And one of the things I love about this is that our architect for the Virginia that we're building down on the waterfront is David Wyman. And David Wyman was one of the persons involved in this archaeological excavation. David's a very modest man, and I always figured, well, he's just somebody, giving them a few tips. And I finally saw a book about it, and it's like, he's one of the head guys, and he's not even gray. So things have changed. But I believe, and this is a bibliography. If you are trying to research the soldiers in the war, I'm losing it. Where is the Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors? Oh, I see at the very top. The Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of the American Revolution is an excellent resource. When you Google something, don't trust that something doesn't exist. For some reason, at least my computer will claim something doesn't exist, and then I'll go and get the page. It's all alphabetical by soldier's name. And the one thing that's very confusing is there's a term called company return. And that does not mean the company came back on that date. A company return is an inventory of all the soldiers, all the equipment, and it can be filed months and even years after the event. That's very confusing with the Arnold Expedition because McCobb's company returns are all in October of 75 in Winter Hill, outside of Boston, when they should already be halfway up the Kennebec at that time. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting.